diet industry. My name's Chuck. I'm a member of the International Socialist Organization, as is Rebecca. Rebecca's going to present today, and then she's going to speak for about 20-25 minutes. After that, we'll go into a group discussion. And at that time, I think what I'm going to do is just have people raise their hands if they want to speak, and I'll keep a list, but we'll kind of get into that a little bit after Rebecca finishes speaking. I just wanted to say a couple of words. I've known Rebecca for 10 years or so now, and I think you're going to find that she's a great speaker. One thing that for me, Rebecca is just a person who's always way ahead of me in politics, right? I mean, it's just always a step ahead. And I think the reason why is because she remains really true to her principles, right? And so at times when it's just easier to kind of go with the flow and accept sexist stereotypes or jokes that are just kind of floating around, Rebecca's always the person who's going to put her foot down and not let that shit go on. So I think you're going to really like what she has to say. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Rebecca for about 20-25 minutes down the discussion. Thanks.
Woo!
Can you see her better?
Okay,
I can see it pretty good.
Weight is an absolute obsession for women in our culture. Growing up, every woman I have known pretty much has been obsessed with her weight in one form or another. I remember in 7th grade in the girls' bathroom, the discussion would usually start with one girl looking in the mirror, and she would call herself fat and say, oh, I need to lose weight. And then all the other girls would say, no, you're not fat, I'm fat, I need to lose weight. And, just kind of go back and forth. I'm sure many of us here have been in similar discussions. And for millions of women, not a day goes by that they don't think about what they're either doing or not doing to keep themselves thin. In a 1995 study, researchers found that 91% of women on a particular college campus had tried to control their weight through dieting. In other studies, it was found that 81% of 10-year-olds were afraid of being fat, and 42% of 1st through 3rd grade girls, that's 6 to 8-year-olds, want to be thinner. And this obsession is it's everywhere, which is precisely why I think at a food justice conference it makes sense to discuss this issue of obesity and of dieting, and in particular how it affects women. So what I'm hoping to do today is to talk a little bit about growing obesity rates in the U.S., and then also address the diet industry and sexism, and then talk a little bit about how I think we can build an alternative where people actually have access to healthy food and to health care, and where women are not permanently psychologically damaged with regard to their bodies. So we know that people in the U.S. are fat. We hear news stories all the time about rising obesity rates. Michelle Obama is talking about obesity among children. It was referenced as a problem with the healthcare system in the U.S., i.e. fat people are costing us all money because they need healthcare. How dare they need healthcare? But why is this happening? Why do people seem to be gaining weight at such a large pace? The dominant explanation we hear is that people in the U.S. are lazy. And in fact, nowhere does it appear to be more logical that this is a crisis of personal responsibility. Obviously, if people just had the willpower to eat right and to exercise, the problem would be solved, right? But this ignores a glaring elephant in the room. Why did tens of millions of people suddenly, in unison, become lazy and fat when their parents apparently were not? In reality, it's a broad social phenomenon, and we need to be able to look at the broad social dynamics that are behind it. In particular, I think we need to highlight the fact that obesity rates are highest in high poverty communities. At first glance, this might seem contradictory because if obesity is a problem of eating too much, shouldn't people with more money weigh more? But in actuality, the wealthy in this country have boundless resources to access healthy food, good health care, not to mention things like personal trainers, personal chefs, etc. For people who are struggling to make ends meet, the cheapest food available is usually the least healthy. FRAC, which is the Food and Research Action Center, has some really great resources on this, and they identify several factors contributing to higher rates of obesity among the poor. Those include lack of access to healthy food, both because it's expensive and because there are actually less stores with fresh food and produce in low-income neighborhoods. Cycles of food deprivation and overeating. because when people have food insecurity, once they get money to get food, they often overeat. And that inconsistent diet is very much linked to obesity. And they note that mothers are particularly susceptible to this because they will go for longer periods without eating in order to feed their children. Limited access to health care, high levels of stress. Stress, we know, is very connected to weight. So instead of this just being a problem for individuals to solve, the data shows that the growing rates of obesity are really connected to the class divide in this country, and the majority of people being deprived of a basic human need, which is healthy food, while a select few amass enormous quantities of wealth. And there's also one other factor behind this that I want to highlight, which is the profit motive of the food industry itself. Within the capitalist system, the way businesses survive is to maximize profits and growth and to minimize their costs. The result of this in the food industry is not only horrifically low standards for agriculture and for the workers, but also a drive to manufacture food as cheaply as they possibly can. What this has meant is an increasing reliance on food that in many respects isn't really food at all. And it has meant that because these companies control the market, the food that most people have access to is highly unhealthy, and our diets are vastly different than they were even 50 years ago. The flip side to this enormous food industry is the get skinny and pretty industries, specifically the diet, cosmetics, and plastic surgery industries. People in the U.S. spend more than $40 billion a year on the diet industry alone. This industry includes large-scale diet programs like Weight Watchers, as well as extremely popular fad diets like the Hollywood cookie diet, and a plethora of supplements that claim to help you lose weight. And by the way, the supplements are not at all regulated by the FDA. Some of these diet products are actually highly dangerous. A number of supplements have had ingredients that turned out to have severe effects, like fen-phen, which caused heart failure, ephedra or ma huang, which is essentially speed and causes major liver damage. Even after being banned by the FDA, because eventually if there's enough death, then the FDA might step in, many of these supplements are still available online. You can get them pretty easily. Then there are also the more dangerous diet programs that actually deprive the body of key nutrients, like the Master Cleanse, the Grapefruit Diet, the Cabbage Soup Diet. There have even been fads of attempting weight loss by swallowing tapeworms and ear stapling. I mean, these are really kind of horrific solutions that people are seeking. And all of this really presents a picture of millions of people, the majority of them women, who are incredibly desperate to lose weight, and they will try anything to make that happen. But the really amazing thing is that even with all of this money being spent and the plethora of books, videos, pills, products, surgeries, etc., 95% of people who diet regain the weight, and obesity rates are growing. So it's obviously not working, but that really isn't a problem for the diet industry because their continued profits actually rely on people's failure and their ongoing desperation about their weight, and they feed off of that. And in fact, many of the same companies produce and aggressively market both extremely unhealthy foods and diet products. In her book, Am I Thin Enough Yet?, Charlene Hesse-Biber points out ConAgra, best known for its line of frozen banquet dinners, sells Morton, Chung King, and Clark Bars, La Choy, and Rosarita products, none particularly health promoting. However, ConAgra also introduced the Healthy Choice reduced calorie frozen dinners. Moreover, ConAgra has teamed up with Thompson Pharmaceuticals to sell Ultra Slim Fast, an extremely popular liquid diet. Eaten too many Clark Bars and Morton frozen dinners? 2 meals a day of Ultra Slim Fast and 1 Healthy Choice frozen dinner will help you lose the weight, and ConAgra will make more money on both. So really, all of the yo-yo dieters, people who go up and down in their weight throughout their life, are a profit boon for a set of corporations that will both help you gain weight and take it off over and over and over again. And then, of course, there's the plastic surgery industry. In 2010, over 1.6 million plastic surgery procedures were done, with breast augmentation and liposuction topping the list. Plastic surgeons are notorious for intentionally lowering women's self-esteem in order to convince them to go under the knife. Just this week, some people may have heard, news hit that a plastic surgeon went to a career day at an elementary school in Virginia and brought breast implants for show and tell. Because apparently no girl is too young to realize that her boobs are too small and that implants are a good option.
Wow.
A few years ago, reality shows like Extreme Makeover and The Swan promised happy new lives for their subjects through extensive plastic surgery, resulting in women that looked nothing like their former selves. This new wave of elective plastic surgery is really kind of reminiscent of the old Twilight Zone episode, Number 12 Looks Just Like You, where in the future everyone chooses one of 5 or 6 bodies and just gets transformed into that for the rest of their lives. And so all of this really brings me to the question of sexism. Why is it that women are particularly targeted by the diet industry and the food and the plastic surgery industry? So we all probably know that women are under a lot of pressure to make their bodies look a certain way. We can see that women's bodies are used as objects to sell pretty much all products. And that the women who appear in any form of media have a body shape that only a very tiny percentage of women actually share. In fact, a number of companies came under fire last year for printing obviously photoshopped images of models made to look skinnier. For instance, there was a Ralph Lauren model whose body was touched up to the point that her pelvis was thinner than her head. So apparently, even models can't maintain the body shape desired by the advertising industry. So on top of the ultra-thin models, they have to Photoshop them even thinner. Whether it's through the constant barrage of advertising about how to fix our bodies, or the culturally accepted fact that women will be sexually harassed on the street. Our society dictates that our bodies are made for display to the world, and that display is expected to meet certain standards. And of course, in order to meet this standard, we must spend inordinate amounts of money on cosmetics, diets, and plastic surgery. This pressure also has some very dangerous effects on women. Girls and women's self-esteem head towards rock bottom as they strive to meet this largely unattainable target. At least 10 million females in the US have anorexia or bulimia, and anorexia actually has the highest premature fatality rate of any mental illness. Around 20% of anorexics, so out of that 10 million, that's 2 million women, will die from complications related to the disorder, including suicide and heart failure. This is an epidemic, by the way, that is largely being ignored by the government. Research dollars spent on anorexia average 70 cents per affected individual, compared to $159 per affected individual for schizophrenia. So this is effectively a plague for young women, particularly between the ages of 15 and 24, but research and treatment is barely funded. Even beyond, though, the more extreme eating disorders, tens of millions of other women spend an enormous part of their lives in this yo-yo cycle of losing weight and gaining it back over and over again. In fact, at any moment, 50% of American women are on a diet. And this is linked to a number of health effects on its own, this gaining and losing. And it obviously perpetuates the stress and the low self-esteem that ultimately leads some in the direction of eating disorders, depression, or suicide. So why is it that the pressure to be thin is so aggressive for women in particular? This is really just a piece of ongoing systemic sexism in our society. Contrary to the myth often stated that women now have equality and access to all the same resources and opportunities as men, women's oppression continues to dramatically affect the lives of women in a variety of ways. Women still have far less economic freedom. Most women work outside of the home and do the majority of the work in the home, all the while earning 76 cents to a man's dollar. In addition, 30% of female-headed households live in poverty. Millions of women are without any type of health care, and a large majority of counties in the U.S. have no abortion access whatsoever. Nearly 1 in 3 women experience a physical assault from an intimate partner in adulthood. That's 1/3 of women experience physical assault. And some studies estimate that 1 in 4 women experience rape in their lifetimes. In this context, when women's lives are devalued and their bodies are not even under their own control, it becomes much easier to see why women are under the most pressure to adhere to an unrealistic standard of appearance. The objectification of women's bodies in turn makes it easier to reduce women's value in all areas of life to that of their appearance and their sexuality. So the real question is then, and what I'm going to finish up with is, what can we do about this situation? Most of the literature that I looked at on this subject, even some literature that actually identifies systemic sort of roots for this problem, ultimately falls on individual solutions. So authors will suggest that women free themselves psychologically from the constraints of modern culture, or at best, provide support for each other in a pursuit of self-worth. Ultimately, though, those solutions don't touch the power structure that's at the source of women's oppression. We are desperately in need of a movement for women's rights that can challenge the industries and government policies that underpin sexism. We need to build a movement that raises the demands that affect the majority of women, whether that is for equality in the workplace, access to healthcare and daycare, or abortion rights. Because a movement that demands equality for women and treats women as human beings is going to raise their self-esteem and is going to counteract the effects of these industries. But even a movement like that is actually not enough in the long run. We live in an economic system, capitalism, that treats food and healthcare as commodities rather than fundamental human rights. The drive for profit in these industries means that they will continuously aim to lower costs by any means necessary, regardless of the effects on our health and our bodies. The system also feeds off of sexism, because when childcare, food, and healthcare are the responsibility of individual mothers in the home, they are no longer the responsibility of the ruling class. And when women are reduced to sexual objects rather than full human beings, the solidarity between men and women is broken down. If we are ever going to be able to raise a generation of women who actually have pride in themselves and their bodies, we will need to build a society that has equality and democracy as its foundation. And I hope that others leave this conference with that type of vision in their future.
That was a great talk, and left us a lot of time for discussion. So, as I said before, I think what we'll do is just ask people who want to speak, who want to raise questions, or just make a comment. Just raise your hand, and I'll write that down and call on you, probably by an article of your clothing, since I don't know the vast majority of you yet. And maybe when you speak up, you'll say your name, just so we get a little closer to all knowing each other. I think Rebecca will probably come back into the discussion here and there to answer questions that are on the floor. But for the most part, I just want to get a discussion going. So feel free to just speak up with what you're feeling, or answer any other questions that are out there being talked about already. I'm also going to pass around this sign-up sheet for the International Socialist Organization. We're a group that meets here in City Heights every Thursday, right down at the Rec Center. So if you liked Rebecca's talk and you want to hear more of this kind of thing, then encourage you to sign up on this, and we'll give you an email or a call and invite you to our next meeting. All right? So let's start passing that around. And who wants to speak? Up front here.
My name's Kevin. I certainly don't want to take away from the fact that this talk was mainly about women, and I know that those industries, that is definitely the target market, but I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that, men are, both sexes are affected by these industries. I guess I can't say equally, but without a doubt, and yeah, it's just criminal the way every end of the spectrum is profit driven, and you can't seem to escape pressures one way or the other, whether to indulge in food or to try to be beautiful and fit this form. So it's definitely a issue that affects both sexes.
Yeah.
My name is Laura. One of the things that's interesting is it's always your fault. It's personal responsibility, right? So you overate, it's your fault. You don't have a good job, it's your fault. You didn't try hard enough. Everything comes back around to meaning that we have to pay to fix it. If it's your fault, then you have to figure out the solution. And they have a plethora of solutions, as she was explaining. from anywhere from $5 for just one little shake to, you know, a system where you're paying thousands of dollars a year to get food, you know, sent to you, because people are not taught what to eat and how to eat it, that they can grow their own food that's healthier. In fact, there's even laws, there's like county regulations, city regulations set up against growing your own food in some places. I mean, it's kind of set up so that your option, the only option you have is the one that the system provides for you, which is free market. You know, like pick one, but you're always going to pay. And your access to healthy foods it gets cut more and more every day, whether you're growing it yourself or healthy organic food that you get in the stores. And also, even considering the education system barely covers nutrition. I mean, even the nutrition that's covered in schools is not necessarily even up to the standard that exists currently in Western medicine, which isn't the end-all be-all of, you know, nutrition. So I just think it's really interesting that ultimately it's always your fault under the system and you're always going to pay for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Maria, and I'm here partly for myself, and also I have a daughter and a son. And she's 8, and she's already coming across people who are commenting on her weight and how she looks and stuff, which kind of breaks my heart, you know. And also want to raise a son who is happy with how he looks, and also accepting and loving of, you know, however anybody next to him looks. And at the same time, I read a book last year that was just about overeating, and it said that the companies that create, especially fast food, they're creating that food in a laboratory, doing lots of experiments on it to make it like there are actually things in the food that trigger the same point in your brain as cocaine, and it does become addictive. And once you come off that food and you have your down, all you want to do is go back to that food. And it's sort of a trifecta of salt, sugar, and fat, and that just hits right in your brain. And that's like really the food industry that's creating the packaged food is very much like trying to get you addicted to their food so that you have to come back and keep buying it because that's their profit. And so, I mean, then we end up kind of like, well, what do we do? Like, it's not just completely individual, but, you know, women spend most of the money. Women are the shoppers, that's what I hear statistically, even like home repair stuff. We're the ones buying things. So, you know, what can we do as a collective? That's really the question then. You know, individually you can stop buying. You know, individually you can do all these things, but if we're going to make a larger social change, then how, like, what would catalyze a larger social change?
Great points and question. Yeah. It's open.
I've been studying a lot of I've kind of been studying like the effect of like healthcare and like the relationship between food and human, and just the way that we treat food is ridiculous. Like it costs so much more to eat healthier, and it's just like people aren't educating themselves. People aren't, you know, just going away from the media idea of what we should be eating and what portions there are, and like controlling it themselves. Because like I grew up, every single day I would get $5 instead of a dinner, and I would walk down the street to a KFC or a McDonald's, and I became obese. And once, you know, it got to a point where my mom was calling me fat, you know, so it was just, I was depressed at like 8 years old, because there's a psychological effect with food. Like, you eat horrible food, you're going to feel horrible. It could take years for that feeling to go away, so it's like every single day you either fight it or you don't. It's like every day we have to fight to keep this image for ourselves and not for everyone else. So just keep fighting to be healthier, to be happier. Because like with schools, they feed us the same crap that we're trying to avoid, or that we should be avoiding. Like there's hardly any food, there's hardly any nutrients, there's nothing that's organic or local. You know, people aren't becoming sustainable, they're just wanting and consuming. So there's all these like out-ratioed like diabetes cases and heart disease. Like we have the highest morbid like rates of all healthcare systems. Like for not being nationalized, we have the least covered people, the highest infant death rates under 5, and the highest obesity rates. And it's all these like numbers that don't add up. Like all the money that we're putting towards like it's all become about the entrepreneurship behind making people feel awful. And so people just coming together discussing this. So it's like, this is already a solution. Every day you make a decision, and that's one tiny solution compared to, that's for you. That meal that you made yourself, or that you went to the farmer's market, or you grew, or you prepared, you know, instead of just going out and buying something that's already, like, you know, saturated and processed and frozen and packaged for you, ready to go. That's your hard work. So it's like every single day you just have to push yourself.
I'm really glad that you brought up the relationship between stress and obesity. We were talking about that in the workshop on race and class. We're going to be talking about it a little bit more later. And one thing that I had read was that oppressed people wear their oppression on their bellies in terms of that fat that just encircles the organs that I have. One of the things that really gets me is that that's one piece that's not talked about. To really look at economic issues and to really look at social issues in conjunction with gender issues. So that, okay, well, you can do the yo-yo dieting all you want to, but if the racism and the classism and the sexism is still in the air, that ancillary stress is still going to affect the body, and it does not matter how well you do, and it doesn't matter how many tips that you take from Cosmopolitan, those things are still going to be there. And it's worse, it's not just the lack of access for healthy food in poor communities, it's the oppression.
That's a good comment. Good job.
I definitely agree. It's the oppression, and it's the, you know, as was mentioned, the economic system that is valued, you know, labor power, and once something is valued, then other things are devalued, you know, things in the home, women's labor, and all of these issues put, you know, are oppressive towards women, and living within, you know, an imperialistic society that is also, you know, oppressive towards women's bodies. And you know, as soon as it all works to sell us something, to sell us another commodity, to make us feel bad about ourselves, so that we try and find solutions within, you know, purchasing something. But it's all, you know, part of an oppressive economic system too.
Cancer patient, fighting cancer for 6 years now. Before all this happened, I was working 2 jobs 6 days a week, and I was trying to carve out one afternoon Saturday where I could go to the Y and pay $5 a pop to go swim once a week to try to stay in shape so I can maintain the meat grinder of working 2 jobs. And where was I going with this? Every so often it would occur to me while I was in the water to swim, like, you know how hard it is for people to try to do this once a week? I mean, like Lacey was saying, it's damn near impossible for most working class people or just a woman had a household just to be able to carve out any time to, or any time, energy, or effort to just be able to take care of herself. And in many circles, that's kind of looked as like you're pampering yourself, you're spoiling yourself. I mean, there seems to be 2 extremes of dieting to look good, so you look good for a magazine cover, versus just like, you know, where do we get this happy medium of like taking care of yourself just because it's the healthy thing to do and you'll feel better? I mean, I'm troubled by that because sometimes I occupy both camps in some ways of like, gee, I just want to look and feel better just so I feel okay about myself, not because someone's looking at me or whatever, just because. And so I think we need some instruction of how to address those inner voices about how can we best feel okay about taking care of ourselves, and not to appeal to some prurient interest or anything like that. It's important too. Thank you.
How's everybody doing in terms of being able to hear each other when we're? Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna recommend it. If you want to speak and you feel comfortable, maybe just stand up and kind of face the rest of people, and probably your voice will carry a little bit better.
And say names.
Yeah, and also if you say your name, that'll help us all get to know each other. Did you want to come back in soon, or do you?
Maybe in a minute.
Okay, and then did you have your hand up?
Yeah, and actually, my name's Joelle. I'm pretty loud, so I'm not going to. I actually do have a question. How do you respond when people do say things like, "Oh, it's really an issue for both genders," when, with all due respect, it's not. It's just not. And I think until we recognize it and acknowledge it, we're not going to make any headway. What do you say? Like, how do you respond to that? When people do say that it's
Yeah, an issue.
oh,
of
it's
what?
yeah,
But-
it's not even close. Yeah.
She's
Oh, okay. I will. How do you respond to someone who says, "Well, it's really just we're both targeted, and men and women are both targeted. It's not even close to equal." And I think unless we acknowledge it and accept it, we're never going to make any headway. But what do you respond to somebody who says that? Because they probably believe that.
I have Sarah on the back there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah from LA. I was thinking about what the brother said about, I think there's one way in which gender stereotypes mess everyone up, which is if, like, I'm a high school teacher, when you think about, like, what it means to be, like, masculine and, like, what that does to, young men in terms of crushing their spirit and, sense of cooperation and everything. But I think to what you're saying, it's like if we don't stand up and say, like, this is what sexism looks like. We need a movement against it. Like the sister who was saying, what do we do about it? I think any movement that fights for equality raises all the questions about all this stuff, like fighting for equal access to women's health care, which they're chipping away at right now. Fighting for LGBT marriage rights. It raises all the questions about what does that mean in this society. Fighting for equal pay in terms of work. I mean, all this stuff that we haven't won yet. When you say sexism and people say, oh, you have to like when we're fighting for it, it raises those questions, and it has to be, and it's the kind of thing where it makes people be able to answer that and show what sexism looks like. And I think also the whole problem is that as long as people's bodies are commodified, we're gonna have these problems. So, like, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Sicko, where the guy cuts off his 2 fingers, and like one finger's worth $12,000 and the other finger's worth $60,000. And like capitalism's this thing that commodifies our whole bodies, And so until we change, and they're going to commodify everything until we change the economic system. So I think commodification of our whole bodies is something that we have to really ultimately change, or we're going to keep fighting this stuff. We're going to keep fighting sexism, all the time.
You in the black shirt.
It hasn't gotten much better, and the way that it's only gotten to being equal is that they're making it so that men are also being told whether or not they're masculine enough, or actually objectified in magazines and things like that. So that's the only way that they're becoming more equal to us, by lowering the standards as well. But I understand that it's not as much as, but it doesn't mean that it should be overlooked. And I agree with what the lady said over there, where like if we start just working towards equity and equality, then all things are going to be higher standards and
my name's Cecile, and something that someone mentioned earlier, made me think of a talk that I went to yesterday, where I guess this isn't so much about it doesn't touch on the sexism as much, but just the hypocrisy of the way that we're sort of the lower income you have, the lower I guess choices you have of what you consume, and most of it is very unhealthy, and the sort of hypocrisy of the idea that our weight and our health is our choice, when actually it's a reflection of our economic conditions. Yesterday, there was a presentation on some studies that were done in LA schools where these women are working on trying to get cafeteria food to change, because what kids are being fed in school, and it's the low-income kids because it's the kids that are forced to eat the free lunches, is like chocolate milk with frosted flakes and juice and some other super starchy thing for breakfast, and all of it is more than the number of calories that you're supposed to consume in an entire day, let alone in one meal. And so these people that and this disproportionately affects the Latino community, and some of the projections for the future now for, like, for example, Latino kids is that the kids born after 2000, 1 in 2 of them, so 50% of them are expected to develop type 2 diabetes by the time they graduate high school, which should be seen as like a crime on the part of the U.S. government, that we're letting schools feed low-income kids this stuff when they have no other choice. So, I mean, I think that it does kind of touch on something that Rebecca said about, like, on the one hand, we're given poor choices for what to eat, and then we're expected to take it as our personal responsibility to then get healthy and lose weight. And like, Marcus was just talking to me, I got an article today in my email inbox about now in California, Governor Jerry Brown wants to cut the budget for Medi-Cal and food stamps. So these, I had never heard that women actually, mothers who are trying to feed their children will starve themselves, and that, that actually causes them to gain weight in the long run. Now mothers are going to have $60 a month less to feed their kids with. So that's going to even, exacerbate this problem. As far as, like, I really appreciate what this young woman said about, the sexism or the objectification of our bodies is happening to both men and women. And the effect of that, I think, is different, because I think there's less of a sense that you'll be discarded as a man if you don't match like, women have to, I guess, have a waist smaller than their heads. I didn't know about that part. And if you don't, once you have a child, you're less likely to match that image, so you get discarded to then raise the children on your own, which puts you on welfare, which is of course your fault. Why are you a welfare mom? And then you're gonna eat, have less healthy options. You're gonna gain weight, and it's just like a cycle, and it affects us at every single stage. I'm glad we're talking about it.
I want to all right, so I had Kevin, and then Rebecca wants to come back in. Did I miss any hands out there? No? All right, so yeah, Kevin.
I just felt like my name's Kevin, I just felt like I was a little misquoted. I didn't mean to say, I tried to preface my statement by saying that there was no equality in my perception of how men are affected by these industries. I know that it's vastly tipped on the scales to target women, and but just as a man sitting here listening to it, I just felt like I deal with these issues too. So that's all I wanted to say.
Oh, we appreciate any honesty. So, yeah, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple things. I think that, first of all, on this question of gender, I really agree with what Cecile was saying. I think that, men are affected. If we talk about, one thing I didn't get to address in my talk is the question of discrimination against fat people. It's actually, there have been studies done now that people earn less money if they're overweight, that they are in pretty significant ways discriminated against in society. And, that does, to a certain extent, affect men as well, I think. But I think it is important for us, as people mentioned, to be realistic about the fact that this is really an onslaught in particular against women, and it really affects women in a very severe way. Just to come back to what you were talking about this kind of having two minds about, wanting to get healthy, but also, feeling like you need to sort of meet this standard. I think that a lot of women, I think most women are in that position, and that's actually why I think that we can't sort of individually sort of resolve these questions, because as much as I know, I've been thinking about this and reading about this for a long time, I still have all the same issues that about food and about appearance that most women have. And so I think it's not something that we can just sort of solve by sort of psychologically getting over it. I think what we have to do is really pin the blame on the people who are creating this system and who are perpetuating a situation where we feel like this is necessary. I think that the only way we can do that is through collective action. I think that it's, we can't just sort of stop buying the diet industry and expect it to sort of wither away, because, you know, as I think the sister mentioned who spoke first, you know, the food and diet industries are sort of intentionally, you know, creating foods, creating things that are addictive, creating things that cause people to be in these cycles. What we need is a collective sort of form of action where the fact that we are the majority, working class men and women, and, you know, even working class women on their own, are an enormous majority of the world's population. We need to be able to use that power that we have in our numbers to fight back and to call out the corporations for what they're doing, and ultimately to start building the foundations for a society that doesn't use profit as a determinant of who gets food and who gets healthcare. Because fundamentally, unless we remove the profit motive, they're going to continue to have an interest in making us unhealthy and enforcing us to keep buying this.
I have about 15 minutes or so to keep talking. So if anybody has anything else they want to share, okay. I'm going to call on this fellow because you already spoke. So go ahead.
Okay, my name's Ken. Yeah, I really like I wasn't here for the whole workshop. I was at a table earlier, but I definitely agree that there's, you know, this need for collective action and things like that. But I also see how culturally we kind of replicate and we perpetuate these values that are part of sexism and part of, you know, unhealthy diets. You know, I was thinking when people were talking about the inequality of men and women when it comes to food, I remember being younger, and, you know, if you chose a salad, it's like, well, that's chick food. That's what girls are supposed to eat. You're supposed to eat a hamburger, and if a woman hits a hamburger, they're like, oh, it's all gonna go to your hips or something, you know? So, like, we do this to ourselves too, you know? It's not entirely a top-down thing. Like, we keep ourselves from, you know, elevating, from fighting against it. So I think, you know, like, forms of collective action that we need to take are, you know, the examples are at this conference right now, you know? If we, you know, take back production of food, if we can farm and we can get it, you know, more new roots and more farmers and things like that, then that's a form of, you know, fighting back. It takes away profits and we feed ourselves, and then when we're growing these things, we put in our own values, things that we want. We can do it and create anti-sexist communities at the same time, you know? So I mean, yeah, we definitely have to hold companies accountable, but we have to know how to, like, back ourselves up and kind of sustain ourselves, and I think that's when we kind of get over these self-esteem and these self-loathing issues too.
Laura again? Oh, I got him too.
Hi. Wow, what I was gonna say might have changed a little bit by that. I do agree. I think we have to like educate ourselves and try to work together to change things. But I think one of the ways that we can change it is by actually, like we've been talking about, addressing the profit-based system, addressing a system. I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, it's difficult for a lot of people to grow. Like I was saying, there are city and county regulations against you growing your own food. So, I mean, there's other things we have to fight, not just like realizing it ourselves. I think that's part of the process as we grow in struggle. Like as we're fighting, then yes, our ideas can change. We can get more confidence in ourselves when we see we have control over our lives, but we have to fight for that control. So I don't think that the realization just comes from us saying, hey, we have to change things. It comes from us actually in the process of changing them and realizing that we have the confidence to like force the system to let us eat better food, to help us make better decisions, and to take the power from the food industry and put it back into, you know, people power, and us being able to grow our own foods and make our own decisions for how the money is spent. The FDA and like all the different ways that food is regulated, that's something we can do. But I don't think it's just about us changing our minds about ourselves. It's change through struggle.
To go all the way to the back here?
Chris from New York. I was just coming here and waiting in the airport and thinking about coming to this workshop. And I counted the number of magazines in the newsagents at the workshop that either had semi-clad or basically naked women on them, and that was 49 different magazines.
Wow.
None of which were pornographic, but all of which were to do with women's issues, which were dieting, cooking, sex and how to look better, right? So you diet, then you can have good sex, and so all of these things, when we're talking about sexism, that is one of the manifestations in which we're constantly reinforced these stereotypes, which is overwhelmingly driven towards the oppression of women. And that's just kind of one simple example. I'm sure people could recount plenty of others. But it's like the food industry itself is maybe the kind of the sharp cutting edge of the barbarity that we live under, where, on the one hand, who the hell wanted, when we think about, do we live in a real democracy, who asked for fast food? Like, why was that created? As if, we were like, you know what, I just want to eat faster, I want to eat terrible food, and if you can serve me that even faster than I can possibly eat it, that's really what I'm looking for in life. And so, on the other hand, we've had to invent a whole nother section of a new market, the organic food market, because the other stuff that they try and feed us is so horrendous that you don't want to. There's a new section of the food system which is more expensive, and so on and so forth. And so I think this is tied into, like, how do you go about fighting that? Because that's Cargill, it's Monsanto, it's all of these other things. The 2010 census, actually, people may know, they took out farmers as a demographic in the 2010 census.
What?
Yes, because they're less than 0.5% of the US population. So you can't actually put down, if you're a farmer, you can't put it down anymore because there's not enough farmers. And yet we are beings that exist based on eating food. And so that's how insane I think the system is. But I was recently talking about social change and how we would get it. I mean, I think the budget cuts are one area that is so vital to fight against, because the more they cut back on that, on all those social programs, the worse our lives are going to be. Because even if you can possibly afford to eat better, who has the time to even cook, right? When you're rushing from maybe one job to your second job, your kids, all kinds of things. It's like becoming an insane lifestyle where we're trying to eat faster and faster. And so while I would say, if you can opt out of that system to whatever extent you can and grow your own food and so on and so forth, it's really about how do we create some social change. Otherwise the situation just gets worse and worse and worse. And I was just recently in Madison, Wisconsin, on a huge demonstration, 100,000 people. It was really exciting because all the farmers that are left in Wisconsin came on their tractors to protest alongside the teachers and alongside the school students. And so there was a tractorcade of like 50 tractors. One farmer brought his donkey. And so that kind of movement against the budget cuts there, I think, is inspiring people all over the country to do something similar. So how could we kind of try and replicate that in the San Diego area, I think is a really important question.
Well, this is good. I was going to say this is as good a time as any to say that Chris is the author of this book, Ecology and Socialism. And he's also going to be speaking at 1 o'clock at the Price Center. So please come and check that talk out too. I have one more speaker who's raised their hand. And we're kind of running out of time. Maybe while she's speaking, if you have a comment, raise your hand while she's speaking, and because I'm going to have to close the list off pretty soon, is what I'm coming down to, I guess. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Nerissa. Sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. I wanted to comment on what Ken was saying earlier, that we are acknowledging that things are systemic, but also that what we can do in the meantime is that we women can look to each other and recreate within just talking to each other. I don't watch TV. I try not to. It makes me feel bad about myself, and I have those conversations with other women. I had, I myself am someone who comes from a low-income community of color, fighting obesity due to a lack of access to, nutritious food, and trying to get out of that and eat healthier and stuff. I was hearing comments, oh, you lost some weight, you look good, you look it, and all those things actually make me feel bad about myself, because they are always, you know, like my body is not something that is yours to comment on, and so I have conversations with that. I tell people, don't tell me that, please don't, you know. I don't do that to my friends. If I have friends who are, you know, who are dieting and making themselves feel bad about themselves, I try and talk to them. So I feel like while we are working on addressing these large, huge systemic issues, what we can be doing is building a community and speaking to other women, because in this society, women are taught to, you know, to compete against each other for men, and that is an idea created by men, you know, and we need to get past that and connect with our sisters and try and, you know, create a community where we appreciate ourselves, because the society devalues us and objectifies us.
Can you hold on a second? Did you have your hand up back there? No. Yeah.
It's some of it.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah. Let's. I'm sorry. Let's cut him and then.
I'll be fast. My name is Mike. I just want to say that I guess the best, you know, it's really obvious, and it's actually designed by, you know, it's by careful design, that sexism has been put into every facet of our society in order to sell you things. And it's you know, focus groups and research. They try to find the quickest and easiest way to get you to buy their products. So the best way to try to change things is through your wallet. I mean, all aspects of our society, from a corporate standpoint, all respond to the same common denominator, and that's money. So if you believe that there are better ways other than what they're telling you, which there are usually almost always are better ways than what they're telling you to buy or use your dollar, use your money in a socially responsible way that supports, you know, non-sexist and positive aspects of living, and try to direct your funding that way, because that's the most direct way of getting them to change, because they will go where the money is. So if the money is going to the more socially responsible ways and principles, they will follow.
She just kind of wanted to say something, because we're all fairly young people here, but I want to bring up the issue of children. I can't tell you how many people have told me that my baby that I'm holding right now is handsome. He's not even 1 year old. I don't even know how a baby can be handsome. I can't even tell if it's a boy or girl. And secondly, I was telling this story last night that my daughter's 2. She probably thinks her first name is cute. She's told she's cute more than anything anyone has ever said to her. That she sees a stranger, she's told she's cute. And kind of going on what she's saying is, okay, it's good. Like how can we encourage each other to think about new models of like how do we acknowledge like children in a way that doesn't have to do with their sex or like their personality or what their appearance is. And so just kind of being really creative about it, because I think it's still needed. Like people wanna engage with you. They wanna like say something supportive. And that's what I realized. Being pregnant, they always, you know, what do they say to you? Is it a boy or a girl? It's the first thing they ask you, and people want to make conversation, but you know, you struggle with how do you have an engaging conversation with someone, but it doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl, and not to be rude to people. Help think about a model that can start to change that, because it starts with even before this baby is born. People are talking about sex. What's your ultrasound say? Is it a boy or a girl? Determine it. Get a pink shirt. Get a blue shirt. You know, and we're already trying to figure that out. It's a fetus. It's still not even living yet. I mean, born. Sorry, I wouldn't get into that conversation. It's not born yet. So I think there's really important things that people want to compliment each other. We're a culture of wanting to feel recognized, and that we're our self-worth, but how do we kind of like challenge challenge each other to think about different ways of engaging.
Okay, you ready to wrap up? Okay, so yeah, Rebecca's gonna wrap up, and then I have a couple of announcements, and then we'll be on our way.
Yeah, I have a 6-month-old daughter myself, and I have more. First of all, just to say, I have more pink products in my home than I've ever seen in my life, because that's what everybody gives us. You know, it's pink, pink, pink. But just to kind of say, I'm also thinking along the terms of that. I have to face that the biggest thing among young women is princesses, the Disney princesses. First of all, what are princesses? They're women who don't work and are completely beholden to princes. And, it's horrible. It's absolutely, and it's royalty, and oh my God, there's so much wrong with it. But I also know that the reality is that she's living in a society, no matter what kind of things I talk to her about, no matter how I raise her, she's going to be influenced by that. And I think that's kind of where it comes back to. And I just say with the brother in the back, I agree with the idea that this is about money. I definitely do. But I think that the question is where is our power? And I actually don't really believe our power is in our wallet, because I think that regardless of how we purchase, we're talking about mass marketing, mass corporations that influence millions and millions of people. And I don't think that we can sort of really severely cut into their profit line by just shopping somewhere else. Nor do I think that escapes the system of capitalism and of sexism. Where I do think we have power is at the point of production. And that's in our power as workers. And I think that ultimately, when we get together and do things like what Chris was talking about in Madison, when we actually shut down the system, that's the point at which we have the power to really affect their bottom line. And and because women are 50% of the working class, that's where we have the power to actually force them to stop and to make our demands. And so I think that we need to be looking towards a model that is actually based on disruption to the system, that is actually based on us coordinated, collectively acting to force corporations to meet our demands. And I think that requires a certain type of action. It requires the kind of action that's happening across the Middle East right now. It requires the kind of action that was happening in Wisconsin. And I do think that today is a really good example of how we can build towards that, because what we see here is that when people come together, they can make valid, healthy, democratic decisions. And I think that we can create that in our movements and build a movement that can really fight this.
So that was just a great wrap-up, great discussion. Thanks everybody for coming. The final announcements are that the next meeting of the International Socialist Organization, again, just a block down south there at the City Heights Rec Center, is this one, Why We Need a Revolutionary Party. I have flyers up here if you want to come check them out. We'll also have them at the Haymarket Books table and tent over there. And that's where you can also find Chris Williams' book, Ecology and Socialism, for $14. So thanks very much for coming, and please consider coming at 1 o'clock to Chris's talk at Price Center.
All right.